Welcome to Make Up or Break Up with Judith Jameson of judithjameson.org. That's both the Facebook page and the website. I've got like 13, 14 shows I do, so I always have to, each opening, I got to make sure I'm doing the right one.
Right. Need a piece of paper in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
that's what I do.
Is that what you do?
Yeah.
It's really fun when I go on Sirius and give out the local phone number, or, it's just, got to get your head together, especially after a long weekend, right?
That's right. Well,
and you had a longer weekend than most.
People have to have a sense of humor, I think.
Yeah. They do.
So, make up or break up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who doesn't want to talk about that right after the long weekend?
All right, so now we talked a little bit before the show about what we're going to talk about, but what are we really going to talk about? Because we usually go off in another direction.
We probably go off. Well, I can't remember where we ended it last time.
Yeah.
But I had started it last week on talking about change, and so I have this article that from the Chopra Center, Deepak Chopra?
Yes.
So they put out some pretty interesting things, and some of it's a little bit too, I don't know, meditative yogi kind of stuff for me.
But you can't just go in the Chopra cold.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just
got to have a little basis, a lot of stuff, but he's accessible in a lot of the other areas too.
Right. So he has a lot of different experts that work with him in his business, and so some of their articles, they're actually not, most of the articles aren't even written by him. He's sort of like the manager of this conglomerate now, right? Where they have these like very elaborate retreats. Find your soul, find yourself, reconnect with nature, that kind of thing.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good business going.
What?
He's got a pretty good business going.
He has a pretty good business going, that's for sure. And I think in today's day and age, there's just, we're going to go down another rabbit hole, but I think part of the problem that also creeps into our relationships, which is why what I do is so fascinating to me, because it's not just, like we talk about, it's not just the Dick Van Dyke Show anymore.
Right.
Right? And so the one thing that I think the Chopra Center, the reason why he's so successful is because people have so much going on now with, women aren't just staying at home, they're going to work.
Right.
And so they're juggling who drops the kids off in the morning and who gets stuff going in the morning. One person has to stay behind, usually. It's not usually the husband and the wife doing it all together. And then you've got things going on during the day, and so little Johnny gets sick at school. Well, then it's kind of like rock, paper, scissors, cut. Like, who's going to go, who's going to leave who's got the least important day with their job to go pick the kid up. So I can see where
dance lessons, little league, piano lessons.
And then you have all the optional activities that so many people are getting into, and it's so fascinating to me.
But they're not optional anymore. People don't see them as optional anymore.
They think
They line up these kids with so much activity.
They think it's the way that they're supposed to do it, and I think that part of it too is that parents feel like they're keeping up with the neighbors, right? Sort of like keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, well, their kids are in swimming and have horseback lessons. It's like, all right, so your kid rides a horse and swims and soccer on the weekend?
Right. And we worked really hard to get our kids into the Andover system, which is a high-paced system.
Yeah.
And I was stunned at the amount of work these kids had from middle school on, even actually in elementary school.
Oh, you mean homework? And things.
The amount of work at night. And it's just, to me, at times, it seemed like too much.
Right.
Yeah.
So picture these kids that are growing up now with crazy homework schedules and whatnot, and then on top of it, you're throwing in soccer 3 days a week.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think I had a problem staying entertained, and I stayed out of trouble for the most part, too. So
I think there has to be more of a thought process. Not to say that any of that is bad or how much you're doing is bad or whatever, but you can't just automatically enroll kids and fill up their schedule. They need some space.
Right. But it's funny because if you think about it, no wonder marriages are under so much stress, because you've got all these pressures that couples are putting on themselves to keep up with other families, especially if you're in more affluent towns like in Andover or North Andover.
Right.
Those kids are being driven to all sorts of different places all the time.
Right.
And while it's kind of nice for the kids, it also sort of creates this culture within the town where people have to sort of keep up.
Right.
And the reality is, on a soccer team, there aren't 100 slots.
Right.
And on the football team, there aren't 100 slots. So there's also a huge competition in these bigger towns for these kids. But I can just see where in other words, what I'm trying to get at is I can see where Deepak Chopra became so successful because people were so strung out and stressed out that they couldn't imagine like having a weekend to themselves or not doing anything. And then they hear about this, and they usually people are going to this when they're like ready to snap, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Because most of the people and I know because I have friends that have gone to these retreats, I'll call them, and also what's that other one out in like Lenox, popular place?
Oh, I don't know. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Can't come up with it.
Oh, I think it begins with a C.
Yeah.
Anyway, Canyon Ranch.
Oh.
Right. And I think they started out in Colorado or something, but then they planted in Lenox. But people go out to just sort of unplug for 2 days or 5 days, and I think it's great. But it would be greater if people learned how to do this on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So that they're having some downtime. Like yesterday, I don't know about you, but, well, maybe because you have a new place, congratulations.
Thank
Maybe you were running around, but for us,
running around, but yeah.
we just gardened all day. And at one point we thought we should go up to Newburyport, or we should go to a beach, or we should go to Walden Pond. And
right.
I think twice my husband brought it up, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to stick with no.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a...
Crash.
Yeah, it was sort of a hard decision for me because I felt like I've got this beautiful day with this beautiful afternoon where you could definitely enjoy yourself in a beautiful ocean, but
didn't you just describe the same problem, though? Isn't this generational in terms of, listen, you and I, when we were kids, I left the house at 8 in the morning. My parents had no idea where I was.
Right.
No phones to get in touch with me. No
cell phones.
No, nothing. I was off running around the neighborhood and making my own time, doing my own thing.
Right.
Kids nowadays are put into structured activities constantly, so they never have that. So why wouldn't they, as parents, when they get into dealing with a marriage, not have an idea how to structure their own time and their own leisure time? It's like, oh, I need to pay X amount of money to go to this retreat, because they never learned how to just hang on their own or work these things out on their own or give yourself a little downtime on your own.
Right. Well, that's why I think no matter what people think, because they seem to have fallen away from it a little bit, but organizations like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, they do so much with kids. It's not just activities, it's things with a purpose. So it's like building character.
Yeah.
When they get their badges, I remember as a Girl Scout, like a lot of our badges had to do with like going to a senior living home type, like a nursing home we used to call them. I mean, you still have them somewhat now, but now everything's assisted living. And the other thing is we would do little crafty things to prepare for like an overnight, we'd go camping once a year.
Right.
And I know Boy Scouts do that too. And then the Eagles, is that what the Eagle Scouts?
Yeah.
And they do that. In fact, they spend tons and tons and tons of time learning how to like survive in the woods, how to identify plants in the woods, how to mark a trail. I mean, it's kind of cool.
Yep.
And it's kind of stuff that you and I probably did like naturally, like we identified plants and did things, because I don't know about you, but when Mom said, get out of the house and come back at lunch, I was like, you left the house.
Yeah.
You literally were like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't wait to put my sneakers on. And you just sort of looked around and what was outside? You're in a neighborhood, so for me anyway, it wasn't the city. You look around and what do you see? Mostly trees and lawns and your next door neighbor and, Billy and Kevin's house up the street, and one of them is playing, so you walk up there.
Right.
Or you get on your bike and you ride around and look for somebody else that's out.
But you created your own life, so to your own pastime.
Right.
Nobody's doing that anymore, especially growing up.
Right.
So again, when you're a couple and someone's offering you a retreat, it's like they're doing it for you. They're structuring it for you.
Right.
It's like, why wouldn't you gravitate to it? But you need to do this stuff on your own.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's like even, like a day at the beach, other than making sure you bring your sunscreen and an umbrella maybe if it's hot out. But when you bring kids to the beach, as long as you have a couple of pails and shovels.
Yeah, they're good to go.
That, and those are the times that kids are going to remember. And I think
Pail, shovel now in their cell phone.
right,
But
and
but still.
they'll remember when their older brother conked them on the head with a shovel, but or they'll remember when they buried you and forgot you halfway down the beach. And it's like, hey, the little talking head coming out of his hand. Hey, let me out. So we're going to talk a little bit later, if we have time, about defiant teenagers. So we have these wonderful memories, hopefully, of younger kids who are naive and they're creative and they're just unaware of like, all the social cues and the negativities in the world. And then as they get older, they're sort of more aware, and they start to feel more of the pressures at school. And then, of course, part of being a teenager is just finding themselves.
Social pressure.
Right.
Too. Yeah.
They've got a lot of social pressures. At the same time, they've got decisions they have to make.
Right.
And we all know, sometimes a bad decision is the lesson, right?
Right.
The teacher is your bad decision. And
Yep.
I think some of these parents, and we're going to talk about that later, unfortunately, some parents that hover, the helicopter parents, that if they hover too much and they don't let their kid just go off and make some decisions, you have kids that are incapable of making their own decisions and formulating who they are.
Right.
And that's why I think when they get to college, those are the rebellious ones that are just like, whoop,
Yep.
or they flunk out because they were never, given some guidance with, homework and things like that, responsibility. And
I've learned two things from parenting. These are the two base lessons, I think. And you can check me on these.
Cheers.
Yeah, these are the two that I would tell a new parent. If I had 5 minutes and was sitting next to a pregnant woman with her first child, and she asked, first of all, you have to teach kids that you got to connect actions and consequence, which means every once in a while letting them suffer a negative consequence, not a big one.
Right.
Right. You try to pick the ones that happen, but you can't don't shield them from everything. Let them suffer consequence. I remember when my kids were really young, it's like they wanted to stay up, they wanted to set their own bedtime. It's like, listen, your grades are okay, you can set your own time.
Right.
Those start to suffer, you got problems. And then just connect action and consequence. The other thing is, you're talking about teenage problems. You deal with teenage problems at 7, 8, 9, 10. If you're dealing with a teenage problem at 16, you get issues.
Right.
Right? These are the teenage years are something you have to build from very early on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing, too...
I've watched too many parents deal with 16-year-old problems at 16, and you deal with 16-year-old problems at 9, 8, 9.
Right. And I think the other thing that is important with discipline is discipline's a good thing, and people tend to shy away from that.
Yeah.
We don't want to be too mean. We kind of want to be their friends. And I always tell my clients, the important thing to remember when you're struggling and you don't want to offend your young adult children, when you have kids in their 20s and you've got to have difficult conversations, and they're asking me well, what do I say? How should I do this? And I'm like, the one thing you have to remember is you're still the ship captain. Even when they're not in your house, you're still their parent, and it's not to say that everything you say they have to do when they're a young adult.
Right.
But you're still the parent, you're not their friend.
By the way, if they're having a conversation about something they're deciding on, they're asking for your help.
Right.
If they don't want your help, you're not having that conversation. That conversation is asking for help.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They're open to your guidance if they're talking to you about it.
Right. And when it comes to discipline, like you were saying, there have to be, actions have to have consequences.
Right.
When we're talking about consequences, I use the word discipline because people don't like that word.
Right.
And it's very important that parents learn, and remember, people don't need to go get a license to be a parent. That's the sad part, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't all get good parent modeling. We definitely don't get classes in parenting.
Less and less. This is a generational problem, too. The whole parenting modeling is declining.
Right. And we don't have classes for it. Just like marriage. We don't really have... You might have premarital classes at the church. But even that, it's not the same.
Right.
And with kids, it's important to remember, and I know it's hard to do, if you can talk about the consequence like it sounds like you did, talk about the consequence ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Because it's you don't want to keep surprising your kids, and the kids are like, wow, where did that come from when I just got grounded for 2 days? It's never happened before. So you have to decide ahead of time, like with homework, that's a big one.
Yep.
We're going to have an hour or 2 hours every night after dinner so you're not too tired or whatever. You know, sometimes they start to drag in the afternoon, or you just want them to go get exercise and ride their bike. But you have to have those consequences. And the other thing is when you're telling them what the consequences are going to be, and if there's punishment involved, because, you know, if you stay out past your curfew, you know, that's, there's going to be this consequence. Here's the key thing. You have to make the punishment or the discipline equivalent and within the scope of the offense.
Sure.
Right? So it's like, hopefully, we're not sending people to jail because they're stealing a pencil at school.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
But we will be told, don't do that. It's disrespectful. Stealing's not a good thing. Cut it out. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Next time, this will happen. But what happens is sometimes parents, especially like we said, if they're burning the candle, as they used to say, at both ends, and especially if someone's single parenting and they have multiple kids, you know, there's a big difference between what you're doing with a 4-year-old and what you're doing with your 10-year-old. Right. You know, we're human. We snap. And the problem with that is that when parents snap, it becomes a habit. Because it's sort of like, all right, well, that kind of got their attention. So then you see how the stricter discipline or the yelling kind of works, right? But what you've really done is you just scared them.
Right.
It's not necessarily, oh, I should have had my homework done by 7:30. It's more like, oh my God, Mom's like a crazy person tonight.
You've moved off the issue at this point. They're not thinking about getting the homework done. They're thinking about Mom not blowing up.
Right.
It's all about the snap. It's not about the issue at hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other
And
thing that really bugs me, that I see parents all the time, I thought you were going there.
okay, go ahead.
Follow through.
Right.
Do not paint yourself into a corner. In other words, don't threaten a consequence that you're not going to follow through on or you can't follow through on. You got to follow through, because once you don't, your credibility is gone.
Right.
And, you know, you see this in stores all the time. If you don't calm down, we're leaving here. Kid knows you're not leaving.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Kid knows, because you say that every time you're in the store. So he just goes off, and you got to have credibility. You've got to follow through. And a couple of times parenting, I felt I painted myself into a corner where I really didn't want to issue the consequence. But it's like, I got to. I said I would, so I've got to.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite one was telling them they can't have, with my son, it was like, if you do that one more time, you're not having TV all weekend. And that's like, oh my gosh, like.
Yeah, then it's more work for you. You got to keep him off the TV all weekend. But,
I'm like, oh wow, that hurt me more than him.
Right, exactly. And
yeah, because then he went around and rode his bike and stuff or whatever. But I was like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Oh, they want more attention from you. No TV, mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's like if you have the discipline, which is perfectly legit for lots of different offenses, if you ground them, you're stuck with them for the weekend.
Right.
And there's nothing worse than a defiant teenager in your house for an entire weekend. But
and a consequence doesn't have to be harsh.
No.
But you have to hold to it. It's got to be a little bit of a ding, but you got to hold to it. And so that everybody knows that what you say you're going to follow through on, you have credibility, and then again, it ties action to consequence. A lot of times with my kids, it was, well, I want to go out, I don't want to do my homework now. Well, that's fine, but you're staying up until it's finished.
Right.
At this point, or we're doing it afterwards and no TV or no video games or whatever. Okay, and they make the deal, then you got to hold them to it.
Okay, and that also reminds me of how, and I was guilty of this a couple of times, parents that type the papers for their kids.
No.
Like, they're all on computers now. They're all typing papers at age, like, I don't know, 7th and 8th grade on. That is part of their homework. Do not type something for them just because you know you can do it in half the time.
Right.
That's part of what their homework is getting it typed up, getting the paper done.
Yeah, getting focused and getting through the job, completing the job. That's part of the lesson, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into that article that we started about a month ago.
Okay.
Yep. And you'll remember some of the things. So a couple of the points, I'm going to scooch right through them. But another article, not by Chopra Center. Parenting responsibilities.
Yes.
10 things you are and aren't responsible for as a parent.
Okay.
Right.
So things I'm not responsible for?
Right.
I remember having that question when you brought this article.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So some of these dovetail into the things that we've been talking about today, which I think is great. All right. We'll start with what are you not responsible for as a parent? So this is a really good one. We've talked about this that's pretty much what we were talking about today. What are you not responsible for? Number one, making sure your kids are always happy. You know what? Sometimes your kids just have to learn to, like, go upstairs and get a book, or go get a game and ask their brother or sister to play Scrabble with them.
Yeah.
Or to play Jenga or whatever. I love that game. It's so silly, but I don't know.
Ever played Big Jenga?
What?
Have you ever played Big Jenga with 2x4s?
No.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
That's a thing.
A thing.
Play it with 2x4s, and it's the same game, except people can get hurt. No.
Wow.
It's the same game. No, it's fun. No, because this is where we started. Kids have to learn to make their own peace, right?
Exactly.
If you're constantly entertaining them, then all their lives they're going to need to be entertained.
Right. They need to
Because
be
they
able
can't
to
develop their own entertainment.
Right. And they need to also learn that having nothing to do and quiet time, which is kind of what we talked about for us adults, is to force ourselves to have downtime and to be okay with it and not feel guilty about, like me, like yesterday.
Right.
There were a few times when I felt like I should be going out and doing something on a gorgeous day. Well, mostly my husband was gardening, and I was just doing different things in the house, getting caught up with work and things like that.
Yep.
And I just said, at a certain point, I'm like, I shouldn't really have to feel guilty about this. It's not like I'm in a race that...
No, I used to emphasize that with my kids all the time. It's like, you've done good. You've had a good semester. You want to sit, watch Big Bang Theory? Go ahead. You've earned a little bit of it. Just
Right.
Make use of it. That's not a bad thing. Just taking a little downtime is not a bad thing.
Right. And the other thing is, what they're talking about in here, which we just talked about earlier, was there are going to be lots of times, especially when you're parenting responsibly, that your kids will be furious with you when you set limits to give them a consequence.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what you were talking about. And
But you know
that's
what? You know what the dirty little secret is?
part of our job.
The dirty little secret is kids love structure.
Right.
They crave structure.
They do like
want
structure.
They want you to shepherd them. Maybe not overly disciplined, but they don't want to be left to their own devices.
Right. Right. Well, it's always interesting
And they
to me.
like expectations because when they meet them, they feel good.
Right. Well, what's interesting to me is I've read a lot of articles and studies over the years that talk about like the structure of curfews, and kids that were not given curfews and whatnot end up doing a lot of couch time in their 20s, and they say that their interpretation was what?
Parents weren't paying attention.
Right.
I was nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
That the parents didn't really care a lot about them because they're out getting into trouble because there's no structure. They have no curfew. They just come and go as they want. The parents never ask them, hey, what are you doing? Or never, didn't spend time with them.
It's funny. I was 9 years younger than my sister. So I was the straggler. And my sister was a handful. So my parents were always involved in them. They paid no attention to me. I never had a curfew or anything like that. And growing up, I thought that was ideal. I loved it. Growing up. Looking back now, I go, wait a second. Why'd they let me choose that college? Why did they let me do this? And because I pay attention with my kids all the time and get involved where I can. And that was the one thing I said I was going to do with my kids is they're going to know I'm interested and involved.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not going to be a helicopter parent, but there's never going to be, really? They don't care whether I do this or do that? It's never going to be that to them.
Right.
Like I said, growing up, I thought that was ideal. Now I look back on it and go, what the hell?
Right.
They barely paid attention to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is, so my parents never gave me a curfew, and I don't think they did this for this reason, but it didn't matter because nobody else was around to hang out with me. Yeah. And I used to laugh because I'm like,
you in the woods?
I'm like, I'll be home at 11 because everybody else had to be home at 10:30 or whatever.
Yep.
Like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know why I didn't have a curfew. That was kind of weird. So, in other words, what they're saying is there are times when you have to discipline. There are times when there are consequences. It's not your job to make sure if they're okay with it.
Right.
If they get mad at you for something, it's like, so what? It's not your job to be like, whoa, they're mad at me. I need to, smooth the feathers. It's like, no, sometimes they just have to be mad at you. We get mad at people.
We laugh at because I'm the dad, but that's perfectly valid.
Right.
There are times when you say, because I'm your father.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, because Because it is. You
Even
don't
my
always.
kids now, I ask them about something or what they're doing or whatever, and they roll their eyes at me and go, hey, I'm just being a dad here. Okay.
Right.
That's my job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is, what they're talking about here too is it's part of our job description. They call it as being like an executive officer. So you're like the executive officer of the family. Not to make decisions based on what your kids will like or tolerate or be okay with, but to make the decisions that are best for them and your family business. And then you have to follow through. So it's everything that you just said. I didn't even read this. And
Yeah.
way to go, Lou. Woo.
It's the one thing I did right in my life, I think, is
that's
parenting.
good.
Yeah.
I like that. The second thing that parents are not responsible for is getting the approval of others. That's an interesting one. So,
Yeah.
rationally, you do not need other adults in your life to tell you that you are doing the right thing.
Right.
Parenting is not a popularity contest in your family or in your community.
Very important.
But how many times do we feel like other parents are like giving us their opinions? You know, our own parents like to give us, like my mom is like,
Yep.
she's always big on opinions on like how me and my siblings should be parenting and whatnot. And
Opinions are okay.
yeah, opinions are okay, but you know,
I'll take them or leave them depending on how I see fit.
right.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to even be more assertive and say thank you, but I'm going to
Yeah.
do something different, or
Yeah.
I appreciate your input, but that doesn't really work for our family, or something like that.
Yeah.
But you have to know that other people are going to have opinions on things and
Right.
what you should and shouldn't be doing with little Billy. Okay, so here's the perfect example. Like other parents in your community are going to think that you should have your kid in swimming
Right.
and horseback riding and, oh yeah, soccer.
Right.
That's a big popular one now. And lacrosse, that's made a comeback.
Mm-hmm.
And any other things that you want to do is perfectly cool too, because you might have one or two other nights. So
Right.
do it.
Yep.
And you, like myself, I didn't do that with my son. And so I watched all these other kids, like, you know, doing sports and things on steroids, but I let my son make a lot of his own decisions and, you know,
Right.
sort of, like, they didn't feel like 25,000 activities were necessary.
Right.
And I think as a result, what I'm proud of in my son, and you may feel similar, just from things you've said, I feel like we might have a similar outlook. My son sees money as a way to survive, but he's not focused on making tons and tons
Yeah.
of money. So in other words, if I said to him, you could have this job in New York City for $200,000, or you could have this job for $50,000, you know, out in Amherst, Mass, he would take the Amherst, Mass job in a heartbeat.
Right.
It's a beautiful area. You know, the college that he chose was up in New Hampshire, so it was filled with like, it wasn't in the boonies per se, but it was definitely like the college town that doesn't have
Right.
like,
Yep.
it's not in New York City or Boston. So what I love about the colleges that are not in like New York City are these other colleges that are on the outskirts, like even like Merrimack College. Is that a university now, by the way?
Not that I'm aware of, but maybe.
Oh. Well, I feel like they're going that way, but
Yeah, it could be.
because they've got so much growth.
Well, every
you-
college is
Yeah.
building something, it seems.
Yeah, but when you go to a college like, you know, or even like North Shore Community College and things, when you're outside of a city, you really are kind of like the way our parents had us taking care of ourselves as children, right? So as young adults, they're more exposed to like nature.
Right.
They have to rely on the college campus more because they can't go out to like clubs because they're
Right.
not going to school in New York City. So my personal
They
feeling
can
is
be more focused.
yeah, I
Yeah.
personally feel, and there's more time to like really focus on your schooling because there isn't as much going on. There might be a drinking problem, but then that's ridiculous to say because you'd have the drinking problem in New York City or Boston.
Sure.
I mean, how many times have you stumbled across like a bunch of BU students like
Yep.
singing and swaying in the streets or going to a Fenway Park or
I
something?
think those 4 years of college are very important, especially depending on the kids. It was very important for my son because I wanted him to have the social aspect of it.
Exactly.
In
right?
town, he wouldn't get that because there's too many other distractions, and it's city and college. Where
Right.
he is up in Burlington, which is a good-sized town, it's
Right.
still mostly college.
But it is still a college town.
Yeah, it's a college environment.
Yeah, it really is.
Hmm.
And there's that one area in Burlington where they've got like restaurants and things like
Church
that.
Street,
But
yeah.
outside of that, it's more disparate. It's just
Right.
sort of, But
money, it's funny what you said about money. We do have similar things, but I had this discussion growing up with my cousin who I was really close with, and we were sitting there at the time going, I said, I spend most of our awake time at work. I want work I can love, so that's what I did.
Yeah.
And didn't make a ton of money. He said, well, you know what? I'm going to go get a good job so that when I am not working, I have the money and the time to enjoy when I'm not working. That's what he did. He made a ton of money. And, I'm not sure I'd trade, but by the same token, I look at it now and I tell my kids, and we've had this exact conversation, I said, I don't want you to be money-driven.
Right.
What I want you to understand is money is options.
Right.
Yeah. So don't go for no money.
Right. Don't go for no money.
Or little money.
Yeah.
Go for, you don't have to center your life around it, but the more money you have, the more options you have. That's why you want money.
Right.
To give yourself options.
Right.
I feel I went extreme, the low money side, and my cousin went nuts. And
Yeah.
God bless him, he earned it too, but yeah.
Yeah. I know, it's interesting how people look at money differently. That's a whole other show.
Yeah. And in money and parenting,
Yeah.
it's okay to have this conversation. I'm remembering all the important lessons. It's important to have this conversation on a couple of different levels. Sometimes you look at your kid and go, we can't do that now.
Right.
Because delayed gratification is an excellent lesson.
Yep.
You can't just give them everything they want exactly when they want it. They should wait for it. They should work for it.
Right.
Delayed gratification is an important lesson. But sometimes it's okay to tell them, not right now.
Right.
We're a little tight right now. We're doing this. We're doing that. Not right now.
Right. And that's one of the topics that we cover in divorce care.
Yeah.
And also one of the topics I always talk about with my clients if they're going through a separation and divorce.
And it's not putting them in your money troubles.
Right.
You don't go that far, but it's okay at times to say, can't swing it right now.
Right.
Because that's an important lesson for them to learn, too, because there are going to be times when they can't swing something.
Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with allowance that's related to some chores.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as they're ready, let them go get a little job, like, serving tables at the local diner or something, on a Saturday, or being a busboy or a dishwasher or
Back
something.
to structure. Jobs, chores, even if there's a little allowance involved, these are all good things. These are your responsibilities. The kids always had, this is your list of responsibilities.
Right.
And for me, for a long time through school, I'd tell them all the time, school's your job. That's what I want you to pay attention to.
Right.
Everything else is secondary. I've got a job, your mother's got a job, your job is school.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's your job.
Give them some responsibility.
Yeah. So the third thing that that the article talks about, what you are not responsible for, and this is similar to some of the things that we've talked about, controlling your children.
Right.
Your children are not, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Your children are not puppets, and you are not a puppeteer. There's just no logical way that you can control every move your child makes or everything your child says, especially outside your home. Children have their own free will and will act on their own accord, and often in self-interest. It's important to remind yourself that if your child is not doing her homework, for example, despite your best efforts to motivate him or her and to hold them accountable, it's their problem. So
let them have the consequence.
Right.
Action.
Right.
We've talked about this in the past, a summer school thing. Nobody wants to put the kid in summer school.
Yep. But
your kid goes into summer school once, and they start to learn that connection between action and consequence, and they start to take things more seriously, you hope, anyway.
Summer school is a reality.
Yeah.
A lot of kids have to do it. So what?
But don't save your kid. Don't go fight against the summer school because you don't want to put your kid in summer school. That's a consequence. And it's, by the way, it's one of those you can let them have, and it's not a bad consequence. Listen, you didn't do your work in school, so this is what you have to do.
Right. And again, it just gets down to common sense. Do not control your children. You can control the environment in your home. You can't control what they're doing at school, per se.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have consequences with that. But like with homework, you could say, no TV, and you're sitting down at the dining room table from 6:30 to 8. If they're doodling, they're doodling.
Yep.
And at 8 o'clock, you say, okay, are you done with your homework or not? If you're done, or you think you're done, then that's it.
Yep.
And it's not your job to make them sit at the table till 9 o'clock until they get it done.
Right.
You just say, this is the hour, every night there's an hour and a half of quiet time, and even if you tell them that they're sitting at their desk in their room, if they're not doing their homework, they're just doodling or resting or whatever. It's like
Yep.
not controlling it. There are consequences, though, because at a certain point you may have to say, if you're not able to get your homework done, you're not playing football. Chances are you'll be kicked off anyway, but you have the right to pull your kid off of a sport. Parents think, oh my gosh, like, I'll just help them with their homework so that they don't get kicked off of the soccer team. It's like, really? No.
I feel I was very lucky with my kids, but the approach for school with the kids was, if your grades are okay, do it the way you want to do it.
Right.
When the grades start slipping, then I've got to get involved.
Right. Then we're stepping in.
Right.
So this one dovetails right into everything else we've talked about, which is kind of funny. So the fourth thing that they talk about is you're not responsible for doing for your children what they are capable of doing for themselves. Many, many times our children will ask us to do something for them that we know they are capable of doing on their own. Your grade schooler might not make his bed perfectly the first time, but practice and doing it imperfectly several times is what he needs in order to get to the point where he can do it on his own. So it's true, like having chores like that. So here's another example. The author says, I'm not saying to stop preparing breakfast for your child once she's old enough to pour her own cereal, or to never do anything to help your kids out in a pinch. What I am saying is to let your kids struggle sometimes and try your best to balance the responsibility.
Right.
So if you don't let them start making their breakfast or let them picking out their clothes for school,
Right.
how are they going to learn?
Yep.
I mean, the longer you
action consequence. That wild morning, a couple of those wild mornings where they get frustrated because didn't pick out their clothes the night before or weren't prepared for the morning. Hopefully that starts to teach them to get ready for the morning to help minimize those wild mornings.
Right.
Yeah.
And the fifth thing...
Again, these are the small consequences you can pick. You don't want the big ones, like you don't want them going to underage drinking parties.
Right.
And, getting DUIs and things like that. Those are the ones you want to avoid, but small consequences like that, link them up. Action consequence, decision consequence.
Right. And the last one that they have in here is you're not responsible for this. You do not have to be Superwoman, Wonder Woman, Mike Brady, or June Cleaver. So, again, we're talking about... these are all fictional characters that seem to do it all, and they do it perfectly. You're not one of them, and you shouldn't strive to be. So a lot of that is what we've been talking about, letting things go. And it's important as parents that we have our own downtime and our own quiet time. And if we're constantly driving kids to activities and hounding them with their homework at night,
right,
it's just too much. That's why, I'll even tell my clients if they're going through a separation and divorce, or if they're working on their marriage, in order to allow for family time or just quiet time and enjoyment, just enjoying each other's company, pizza once a week is fine. Don't kill yourself to be out shopping 3 days a week for
People have problems with pizza once a week?
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't think about it.
Yeah.
They're thinking about they're stressed out because it's oh my gosh, I have all these meals to make and stuff like that. But there are some...
Pizza night, baby.
Right, but there are some things that are easier, like frozen vegetables. A lot of frozen vegetables are great because they're picked fresh. I buy frozen vegetables all the time. The way I look at it is I'm a germaphobe. They've probably been touched fewer times than the fresh produce that's in the department where somebody's been handling the broccoli I buy.
Yeah, those steamers, those bird's eye steamers.
Yeah,
awesome.
The bird's eye steamers.
Yeah.
So there are tons of blogs out there and lots of books out there now, cookbooks, on how to do that well and do it as easily as possible. My personal favorite, which I'm doing today when I get out of here and go get the ingredients, crock pots. I love crock pots.
Yeah.
Once you make a couple of meals in a crock pot, you'll never go back.
Right.
You just don't want to turn your oven on for an hour.
Yep.
You want your crock pot on for 6 hours while you're out of the house or even in the house doing whatever you want.
Right.
You're not watching to make sure the chicken's not burning or that the chicken broth isn't drying up in your pan.
Right.
Crock pots are great. Oh my gosh, I can't say enough about those.
Yep.
I love them. So here are some fun things that I don't think we ever got through. What are you responsible for?
What am I responsible for?
So a lot of these, Lou, we've already talked about. This is perfect. Number one, making tough decisions that are not popular ones.
Right.
So things that other people think you shouldn't be doing with your kids, or things that your kids don't agree with.
Right.
It's all about you and your family and what you guys have decided. Again, though, you want to try to keep it within context. So decisions that you're making are for your family's best interest, and hopefully your kids are aware of things along the way, so you're not just constantly surprising them with things.
Plus, I think if you give them something like that and they understand it's because of circumstance as opposed to you just being mean, if you have a reputation of just being mean, it's like that's what kids rebel against. If they understand, they absorb a lot, they understand a lot. If I look at my kids and tell them, not this week, can't swing it right now, they understand. Right.
Well, one of the things that they talk about in here is something that you mentioned earlier. It says here, all right, let's see. Along with all of this, remember that you are not required to give lengthy explanations of your decisions. It's not safe.
Right.
3 words. Can be plenty of explanation when your teenager asks why he can't jump off the roof and onto the trampoline.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility.
Yeah.
Is enough of 3 words to justify telling your child it's homework time.
Yep.
So you just say, it's your responsibility.
Yep.
That's all. You don't need to get into all the possibilities of what if or if then. So parents tend to say, look, if you don't do your homework, then you're going to fail at math. You might say it once, but you don't need to say that every time your kid's not doing the math homework.
This is back to because I'm the dad. And one thing, what they're talking about there is, and I see this mistake with parents all the time, do not enter a negotiation with your kids.
No.
Never negotiate with your kids. No. It's okay to say, it's not safe.
Or you can listen to them, but ultimately you're the parent.
Right.
And so your decisions have to be, I appreciate your viewpoints, or I understand where you're coming from, but that's just not how we do things in this house.
You open the door for your kid to negotiate, and they're going to drive you nuts.
Right.
They're going to negotiate everything.
Right. Exactly.
Now, I'm the dad.
Right. So, one of the things in my house was this is just me. Mm-hmm. This is me, right? It's not just me, but it's me, and my husband feels the same way. And even, with my second husband, we were on the same page with this. I was like, we've got 2 teenage girls, his kids, and a teenage son. They're all, starting to date a little bit, this, that, and the other thing. And we need to honestly be aware of the fact and not be stupid that a lot of kids are experimenting sexually very early on. Mm-hmm. And, often with multiple kids in the school. I mean, it's just like a weird way of, especially like they talk about the whole hookup thing. It's like, it's not what we used to have, but this is what they have. And it's kind of become a norm. It's not necessarily what you want your kids to feel is the norm. It may be something that they may be pressured into. So I made it clear from a very early on. I said, look, in our house, we are not sleeping. We do not sleep around, because I had a son. So, and my husband had a similar conversation, but probably not as strict. But I was like, I don't care if you go off to college and you're 19 years old, unless you're engaged and getting married in the short term, you're not coming home with a girlfriend every year, or whatever, which is normal to have different girlfriends. But you're not coming back here and sleeping in one bedroom. Right. Yep. And I used my son just knew from an early age. I was like I can remember having talks with him when he was in 5th grade. I'm like, look, I sort of framed it this way. In our family, meaning under your grandmother's morals that are my morals and my moral compass, and your great aunt, the way our family we don't sleep around with lots of people. Sleeping with someone means that we're in love with them and that we think this is going somewhere. We're not just sleeping around. Right. And furthermore, as you get older, unless you're married, you're not bringing home girlfriends and sleeping in the guest room. And so it's funny because in college, when he had a girlfriend, he, they only stayed at our house twice. Yeah. And my husband's like, do you think it's because we won't let them sleep in the same bedroom? I'm like, it could be, but I don't care.
But that's okay. Yeah.
I don't care. Yep. And they didn't get engaged, and they did break up, and it wasn't the forever girl. And you know what? Whatever. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like I didn't have a long explanation for it. I just said, look, in our family, that's all I would say. This is not how we operate.
Learn to respect other people's boundaries.
Right.
Right.
And it's a respect for, the people that you're with, the people that you're dating.
Yeah.
And I also had to explain to him at a young age.
You don't have to agree, just respect it.
Right. And you probably had these conversations too, where it's like, when two people get intimately involved, you have now this special responsibility because you may feel like, well, she's not that great, but she's okay for now. And this young lady may feel a lot more for you.
Right.
And it's not really fair to enter into that sort of a commitment and a relationship when the other person maybe you just haven't taken the time to figure out if you both feel the same way.
Right.
So other things that you are responsible for, and again, like I said, most of my friends that my son was growing up with didn't have that out view on, girlfriends and whatnot. But
right.
Like I just stuck to it. I don't care. What you are responsible for. Number 2, teaching your child to function independently. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about that.
Talked about that a lot, yeah.
Right. So I think that's important. It is your job to teach your child age-appropriate skills in order to allow them to become more and more independent.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what do we want to do? Launch them.
Right.
Right? We want them to be comfortable with being independent. We want them to feel happy about being alone. We want them to feel alone but not lonely.
Right.
We want them to feel like, wow, I'm excited to be out of the house. Not, oh, I'm afraid to be out of this house.
Yep.
Oh, I don't want to do that or whatever.
Yeah. Drop them at a class and let them interact.
Right.
And get out of the scene, because so often when you're young, you're always a pairing, parent-child, parent-child, parent-child.
Right.
Let them go off into the pasture a little bit, and we talked about it, structuring your own, their own playtime, their own self-satisfaction, how they deal with their own responsibilities.
Right.
Let them develop some independence.
Right. Now, that being said, families with more children will have different personalities and different kids, right? So
my buddy and I were just talking about the differences in kids. Same gene pool, totally different people.
Right.
It's amazing.
So you may have one kid that's fearful of new things, is reticent to try something new, is reticent about leaving the house, whatever, and that just takes more education with coping skills for that kid. So don't just assume that all 5 kids are going to fly the coop.
My daughter is as gregarious and social as it gets. My son's more reserved, or at least in front of me.
Right.
I think he has another life going on, but you have to deal with them differently because they have different challenges.
Right. So I just wanted to say that because other people might be listening to this, watching the podcast, going, "That Judith and Lou, man, they're like."
Anyone with 2 kids will tell you they come hardwired incredibly different.
Right.
Yeah. They're always. It's amazing how different my 2 kids are.
Well, yeah, but so there's different ways to make the child that's better with doing the homework and better at sitting for an hour and a half. Maybe you give the kid that has a harder time sitting and isn't necessarily the bookworm, give them like a 5-minute break every half hour. Yep. You can structure it differently. It doesn't have to be sit there and it's not like don't move. You know what I mean?
My son was innately responsible. You'd give him something, he'd do it. Because he knew he had to do it. Daughter struggled with homework and school a lot, so he just had to deal with them differently.
Right. Right. So each kid is different. So we want to, definitely,
My daughter was more the artiste. She wasn't. Structured schoolwork didn't really work for her as well as it worked for my son.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, too, is so kids like that, they're not really book focused. Right. They like to work with their hands. They're more visual.
Right.
So learning for her would be more a teacher talking and explaining something as opposed to like the book learning.
Right.
So one of the things that we've already talked about, I don't know if we just covered this. I don't think we just did. We already talked about this. We are responsible for holding our kids accountable. So in other words, for example, when your child is putting off their homework, you might turn off the TV and say, watching TV isn't getting our homework done. Once your homework is done, you can turn the TV back on.
Teach them the link between action and consequence.
Right.
That's the most fundamental parenting lesson that you have to get across. You have to connect action and consequence.
Right. So you're holding them accountable.
Accountability, yeah.
Right. Another one is, it could also be as simple as firmly saying, we don't talk that way in this house.
Yep.
And there's a whole other show that I want to do on that. When you have the child that talks back to you, the defiant, How do you deal with that? And a lot of that is, you may have to have more lengthy conversations and whatnot. But
You don't respond in kind.
right. And,
I remember
Right.
we had an Aussie who used to bark at things on the street, and he'd be barking, and my daughter would yell at him to stop barking. And he says, "You understand, all he's hearing is you're barking along with him.
oh,
He's not hearing stop barking, he's hearing you're barking along with him." Parents do that all the time. They get into a high conflict, they get a high conflict response from the kids, and they go high conflict. And that's not teaching any lessons, right?
nope. Make your statement,
Yep.
end the conversation, walk away.
Because the high conflict response from your teenager is looking for exactly that. They're trying to draw energy from you.
Right.
You say,
Exactly.
No, we'll discuss this later.
We'll discuss this. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is going to be a good show. We're going to do one on that. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll do that. And we can't do it next week because we have a career coach coming in.
Oh, yeah.
The fourth one that you're responsible for is going along for the ride. On the roller coaster, that is. We all know, but often struggle to accept, that life is full of ups and downs. And sometimes it gets turned upside down. There will be times when your child is doing well and times when he or she is really struggling. That is not a reflection on you, it just is. Do not blame yourself when this happens.
Right.
So brace yourself because parenting's not easy.
Right.
So whether or not you planned to have kids, you have kids. You need to buck up. You need to be responsible. I don't care if you're like a 19 or 20-year-old mom or
Right.
dad. The reality is this child is looking to you
Right.
for guidance and for you to be strong and for you to have the, like you said, the boundaries and the
Right.
consequences and things. But it's also important always to remember, no matter how cute that little 6-month-old kid is,
Right.
because babies are cute, there's going to be a time, most likely, when they're going to buck the system, and that's just the way it happens. Or life is going to turn upside down, or your kid's going to end up with the wrong group of kids. That happens. It's like you could have the best kid, and
Why
they just
try to create a perfect
Right.
world for them
Right.
when they're not going to live in a perfect world?
Right.
There are going to be ups and downs. Everyone's got,
Right.
teaching them how to process those, accept those, and work through those is an important lesson as any is.
right,
Right?
exactly,
So don't protect them from everything.
right. And the last thing you're responsible for is doing your best. That's really all you can do sometimes. It's a perpetual balancing act, which we've talked about, striving to find that balance between doing too much and doing too little, or giving consequences that are not too harsh, but not too soft either.
Right.
And this is funny. Parenting can feel like a circus sometimes, and there can be several balancing acts going on at one time. That's when you have to go back to picking your battles, which I was going to talk about earlier, picking your battles,
Right.
and realizing you're not, nor will you ever be, June Cleaver or Superman.
Right.
It's just not realistic. And above all else, which I like this sentence, remember that your child is unique and you know him or her better than anyone else on the planet. So again, when we're talking about when you have more than one child especially,
Right.
each kid is unique, and it's not fair to
Right.
any kid to be expected to work in a certain way. So like when you hear kids like, well, my dad was a big football player, so my dad put me in football.
Right.
Well, maybe you've got the kid that's artistic or they're really musical.
Right.
The last thing that kid wants to be doing is running down a football field in a helmet. It's just not.
Yeah.
Do not force feed your kids into activities that don't dovetail into their personality and what they want. And sometimes parents feel like, well, if I put them on a soccer into the soccer game, then they're going to learn about how to be part of a team and this and that. It's like, well, they could learn how to be part of a team if they're on a debate team.
Right.
Or they could be part of a team if they're in the chorus because everybody's singing together or they're doing a solo.
Right.
Remember to not over-define how to create character in a child based on your experiences. And I see this all the time in these towns, like, the soccer moms, right, and whatnot.
God, yeah.
Sports, while it's good, especially I feel, just from a physical activity standpoint, if your kid's really musical, so what if they're not running down a soccer field? You forcing them into soccer is just ridiculous. If they really don't love it and say, Mom, I want to be in soccer, let's do some soccer.
I was an athlete as a kid. I'm a stick and ball guy. I love team sports. It's incredible lessons. But
Yeah.
if your kid's not into it, it's counterproductive.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, you can't force
them, no.
all your kids to, take up a sport.
My son played ball, loved playing ball, and there was
Yeah.
a point where it wasn't working for him anymore, and it's like, well, that's okay.
Right. But say you had grown up with hockey, and you loved
I did
hockey
grow
and
up with
skating.
hockey. Yes.
Like, can you picture your son or daughter doing that?
My kids don't skate.
Okay, but see what I mean?
I played hockey through college. I loved hockey.
See, that's what I'm saying. So you were like you love to skate.
Yep.
You love the hockey. You like everybody's got a stick. You're trying to get down to the goal.
And I should have put skates on them, but it just never came up. It wasn't a passion for them. It wasn't there.
Yeah, I don't think that should have is the right thing. I don't know. I haven't seen the movie. I almost rented it yesterday. Did you see the I, Tonya or whatever?
I haven't seen it yet.
The Tonya Harding. Yeah. Well, it was up for all kinds of awards. I think it actually got some awards.
Yeah.
And apparently it's this whole other view of her upbringing and things that we don't know about with her mom and stuff.
Oh, God knows what she went through. Her mother was a piece of work.
Right.
Yeah.
And apparently it's very well depicted in the movie. So I am dying to see the movie. But again...
By the way, the Kerrigans were interesting, too. The whole Kerrigan family.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I don't know how the movie portrays it, but there was some interesting dynamics there, too.
Oh, okay.
Well, think about it. And I'm painting with a broad brush here, and I'm going to get myself in trouble. But think about the point where you take a child that has...
These are not the views of Judith.
These
this
are not
is the views of Lou.
Think about the minefield of a life structure where you put your child into an activity at 5 or 6 years old, and they go to the Olympic level.
You mean if you put your kid into, like, skating... Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, how do you get to... Well, how does any kid get that good, though? They must be taking, like, 25 hours a week of skating.
No, I mean, you think of the Tiger Woods of the world, you think of Olympic athletes, that singular focus on a child starting at 5 or 6 years old. I mean, I'm sure it can be done healthily. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Do you know the devotion that those kids had to put in to get to the Olympic level?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like a lot of musicians... They are...
Just had that conversation last night, too, with my daughter.
What?
The whole musician thing, yeah.
But, you know, when you think about musicians who... People like, you know, if you're going to be, like, a phenomenal pianist or whatever, you're not sitting down at the piano for half an hour.
No. No, it's a highly focused... To get that good, you have to be highly focused.
Right. And so, you know, you picture someone like... 2.5 hours a day, you know, just going up and down. Maybe the piano teacher has them just going up and down different scales or whatever. And you sit there and going, oh my gosh, I would like bang my head on a wall. It's like, no. It has to get to the point where it's so natural that they can sit down and someone says, do the scale of whatever, and they just can do it. And it's the same thing with like the skating and whatnot. I think the point that you're making is the point that I've always questioned this.
A very treacherous parenting model.
Right. Was that 5-year-old really that excited about golf? I mean, it's actually funny because I don't picture 5-year-olds, the golf thing, but you're right. Like, a lot of these golfers, their dads had them out. And the same with tennis.
The Tiger Woods example is the example. You know, that's the poster child for this.
But even, like, tennis players, they'll talk about, like, my dad was my coach. Well, what does that tell you?
Yeah.
It's because dad was a tennis player, and they want their daughters to become tennis players.
Right.
You know, it's kind of insane in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm sure there are healthy, good, strong examples of it, but it's treacherous.
Right. And even like a gymnast, when you think about, like when you see like videos on this and whatnot, like what a gymnast goes through, like you and I would look at it as like, that's pretty phenomenal that they just like went across a balance beam and did a flip. I mean, I couldn't even get up on a balance beam. But like you said, a lot of these...
They've been in gym classes 3-5 days a week since they were 5 years old, 6 years old.
And like, no exaggeration.
Really? Is that...
I don't know. It seems a little bit absurd and extreme to me because also...
I don't want to go that far because we're painting with a really broad brush, but it doesn't... Again, very treacherous way to go about this, I think.
Right. I just think it's interesting because you're sacrificing a lot of other things for that child to do the thing that you typically... I think a lot of these parents, they picked it. I don't think a kid comes... I've never met a baby that comes out in delivery, labor and delivery, and says, hey, I want to be a professional tennis player.
And I think a loop evolves there where someone says, wow, she could be a really good gymnast, and they start working with her, and they start, if you come to my class 3 times a week, you know, for this money, I'll teach her how to be a really good gymnast. The girl goes through it, she gets positive response from her parents, wants more, and the cycle develops, and it's not really about what they want to do. Maybe they want to be out doing whatever 6-year-old girls do as opposed to being in gymnastics. I don't know.
Yeah.
again, very broad brush, but it seems like a really interesting way to bring up a child.
Right.
But you have to get to the Olympic level, I guess. But
Right. Exactly. Well, and most of them don't go to the Olympics.
right.
Dirty little secret. So hopefully they were able to do
Well, that
something
was the
with it.
basis of from what I understand from the Kerrigan family. And again, think about what has to go through bringing up a girl through figure skating to the point where she's an Olympic athlete.
Right.
That has to be at least a unique parenting structure, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because typically both parents have to be all in with that.
Sure.
But maybe it's only one parent that's taking them to all the
It's expensive.
classes. It's expensive.
Time
yeah.
consuming.
Well, and competitions aren't usually in your hometown.
Right.
As you progress, right? Same with like cheerleading. I mean, some of these young girls in like junior high and high school,
Yep.
middle school, their school cheerleading squads are, and I had a friend in Burlington whose both daughters went through that. There's this whole competition thing with cheerleading. It's like way more than just like rah-rah at the football game.
Yep.
And the goal is to get down to like the finals for the country down in Florida. It's almost always in like, it might even be in Orlando.
Right.
But it fascinated me that because the amount of time
Right.
that these girls put into their cheerleading was unbelievable.
By the same token, though, I'm not adverse to scholarship earning.
You know what?
I'm not adverse to scholarship earning. I remember when my son was in marching band, he goes, "Would you ever consider taking up the tuba?" He goes, "Why?" I guess, "A lot of schools are looking for tuba players." And they
Wait,
pay money
who said
for 'em.
that?
I said that to my son at one point. I was just kidding.
Yeah.
But, at a certain point, because he was in the band, he was playing sax, and I'm going, a lot more scholarships than tubas.
Yeah,
He's going, "I'm not learning to play tuba, Dad." It's okay, just bringing it up.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Too funny.
Yeah.
Well, how much time do we have, Lou?
We're over time, so we'll get out of here. But
Okay.
We're here. Check out judithjameson.org for past episodes of this program, all kinds of subjects, narcissists, divorce, finances of divorce, wellness.
Right.
all
How to
kinds of
find a
subjects.
date.
Go check us out.
How to date.
Yeah, how to date.
Right.
And next week?
Next week we have Coach Jackie on. Jackie Ross. She's a phenomenal career coach. And I'm going to have her on because so many people out there are looking for jobs. And especially during a separation and divorce, the judges are now telling, the non-working moms and dads they have to go back to work.
Right.
So, I mean, unless they're like 70.
And besides, we all changed careers. Most of us changed careers a couple times during their lifetime anyway, not like the old days, right?
Right. And so I'm going to pick her brain on like the new structure, like resumes. How do you go about creating a good resume and things like that?
All right, judithjameson.org, the Facebook page for past episodes of the show, judithjameson.org, the website for contact information, information about workshops coming up and things
everything.
like that. And you can get in touch with Judith and find out what it's all about.
Exactly.
We'll see you next week.
All right. Be well.
Just gotta be smart.